Hi teachers or educators. In this video, we're going to take a quick look at using Google Forms in order to survey each other. Google Forms can be a great way for students to create their own surveys, especially when collecting data, regardless of what course they're in. Now, there's lots of survey tools out there, and as a teacher, you may want to explore more, but I'm sticking with Google Suite products in this module just because they're so accessible to students. When I looked at a lot of other engaging survey tools out there, a lot of them are not either safe for students or don't comply with FERPA laws in order to make them easy for students to use and safe for students to use. So we're going to go back to the Google Suite because for the most part, when surveys are created by students, they can do all the things that they need to do within Google Forms, or we're going to look at just using Google Sheets. So to start with Forms, in order to get to Google Forms, you'll want to go to forms.google.com, or you can click on the app launcher in the upper right-hand corner and select Forms off this list. I also additionally have it linked in Clever for our district, so you can access it there and students can access it there as well. Now, when you first go into the Forms dashboard, if you've never been into Forms before, you have the option to view some different templates, but for the purpose of this, we're going to just start with a blank. I actually have one started right here. So I'm going to click on this form. I don't have any questions other than your name inside of it. And let's talk about some of the basics. So at the top, we can give it a name, and I can give it a name right here and click up here and it will automatically name my document. I also can put it in a folder so that it's filed away for safekeeping. On the right-hand side, I'm going to see the option to customize that theme where I can pick the color and background color of my form as well as the font style of my form. I tend to stick with basic. We want to make sure things are easily readable to all. This decorative looks pretty cool, but for readers, this can be not as accessible. You can also upload your own image banners, and there are certain dimensions if you want to make your own banners for Google Forms. We're going to skip the rest of these buttons for now and come back to them as we are writing our forms. So forms, we start with our title. I put some real general directions in the top. I try not to go overboard on my directions because I'll be honest, students, peers, teachers, adults, not everyone tends to read the directions. They just want to get the survey done. So we are going to go ahead and start with the first question. In this particular survey, I actually want to collect the user's name. Now, just a tip as you are working with students or working on your own, I've learned the hard way. I find it's best to ask first name and last name in two separate questions. That allows me to easily sort my final spreadsheet by first name or by last name. If I ask them together, sometimes students put names in different formats and I can't quickly sort my spreadsheet responses. If it doesn't matter, then you can just put a blank in for name. It should automatically recognize that this is a short answer type of question, and you definitely want to make any identifiable questions in the beginning required. That forces the user to have to answer those before they can move on. Now, within each question, you have the option for all these different choices and types of questions. You can duplicate or delete questions at any point, and then you have the opportunity to click the three dots and it'll give you some options to either show the description or use response validation when needed. To add more questions, I want to click on my last question that I created and then click the plus sign. If I'm here and I click the plus sign, it's going to insert a question in between, but I can use those 6 dots to drag my questions up and down. So I've got last name, first name. Now I want them to and I'm actually going to put in a text box. I want you to measure length of your foot like in the picture below. I want to make sure to give some direction so that everyone's measuring their foot correctly, and then I'm going to add an image. We'll go to Google image search. Foot measurement with ruler. Let's see if I can find someone measuring their foot. Normally I would make my own picture and actually take a picture to ensure that this was accurate, but I think you get the point. We'll just put a ruler in here for the moment. Yeah, that looks, no, that's of course not a ruler in inches, that's a centimeters. Okay, so I might want to then move this measure the foot picture to that image title, and I'm going to delete just that title box. So what they're going to do is fill in their last name, first name. That doesn't make sense. Let's put first name above, and then they're going to measure the length of your foot like in the picture below. You could even insert a video to provide video directions here to ensure everyone measured their foot. How long was your foot in inches? And this is going to have to be a short answer question, and I'm going to make it required. So that's all that the students are going to input. It's a rather short survey. Now, if I have a follow-up question to my data, maybe I also want to measure the length of the foot in centimeters. Now, we know as adults that data should be identical in terms of the actual length because centimeters converts to inches, but that may be an interesting investigation for students to go about to really see why that data matches up. So what I could do is add a whole nother section to send the user to another section of the form that kind of reorients their focus. And what I would do to make this happen is click the equals button down here. It's not really an equals, it's supposed to be a second section, and you'll see it comes up with section, measurement in centimeters, and then I could add additional questions here. You do have the option to choose as you survey to kind of do some branching in your forms depending on how users answer certain questions. So let's say you have multiple sections and you want users to finish section 2 and then they go to submit form, but some users are only going to do section 1 and then submit form. So there's different ways to go about using your forms, and you can even add multiple choice questions in here. We're going to add one real quick. Did measuring your foot go? Great, I need help. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this required. We're going to click the 3 dots, and then we're going to select go to section based on answer. So this group, if it went great, okay, they submitted form, they're done. Maybe this second group, if they need help, they're going to go to another section that further explains how to measure your foot, and then they'll be able to answer the measurement of their foot. So you can play around with inserting the different features here. Again, you have a bunch of different question types. Some of your question types that are best for surveys, especially when you're collecting data, are things like multiple choice, checkboxes. Linear scales are great for collecting data. And then you have some different checkbox or multiple choice checkbox grid. You might even have a question that has to do with date or time and want to bring that in to collect some data as well. Another thing that you can do is you do have the ability to import questions. I'll be honest, I find it rather quick for me to write my questions right within Google. I don't usually have them written down in a Google Doc ahead of time, but if you do, there is an import questions option. You can also import questions from other Google Forms. So if you have heavily created within a form and you want to bring certain questions over into this form, that is an option. I should rewind. This is to import from another Google form. There's an add-on that will let you import from a Google Doc. Let me know if you have questions about that. You can add text. Text is great because it comes up in a heading with a sub heading underneath it, and it's real bold. So if you really need to draw your readers' eyes to specific directions, text can be great to add. Images, you can add videos right within, and then obviously sections. And you can map your sections in whatever way you would like. So I'm going to delete this section because I don't need it at this point. And I don't want this question. All I want is these questions here. So let's take a look at what this looks like and my different options up here for sharing with students. So the first thing is I want to be able to preview. Preview is going to show me exactly what the users will enter so that I can even complete this to see how it goes. So test. My foot is 15 inches long. It's not. Some inaccurate data there. We'll click and to submit another response. I'm going to submit just a few responses so that we can take a look at some of this data. And we'll submit one more. Okay, so I've got my responses submitted. I'm going to close out of that, and now I'm back to the main part of my form. I've previewed it so that I can see what some of the data coming through is going to look like. I can see those numbers, and if people are inputting numbers for that short answer, it will give a graph to help students get started. But there's lots students can do with further analyzing that data. So don't be afraid that the graphs are already given in some cases, because you can take it that much further with students and that much deeper. In the gear, there are a couple of things to be aware of in the gear, whether you're creating for students or students are creating for students. The first one is collect emails. I like to do this just in case if the names end up wonky. That way I have a backup. And if you want students to receive, or whoever's filling out the form to receive a response receipt, you can always do that. Sometimes when I'm working with students in the classroom, I like to limit to one response, but when I'm working with adults, I typically don't, just in case if there is some weird issues. This way, when I'm collecting data or students are collecting data, it keeps peers from manipulating that data by creating a whole bunch of responses. And then you can decide if respondents can edit after they submit or see summary charts. And a lot of times I leave these off initially. Under presentation, these are just things to be aware of. If your form gets to be a little bit longer, users like to see a progress bar. You don't usually ever want to shuffle question order when you're surveying, and then you can have a confirmation response. And because we're talking specifically about surveys, we're going to totally skip that quiz section of Google Forms. Now, over on the right-hand side, under the 3 dots, just a couple of things that you have available. Making copies, getting pre-filled links, adding collaborators. This would be if you want another person to work on building that form with you, and then some more technical things available. Last but not least, let's talk about how to get this out. How do you as a teacher get the form out to your students? Well, I would suggest actually going to Google Classroom and simply posting this form in Google Classroom. But there's another way that you can go about this, and that is to click the send button and choose links. We're going to shorten the URL, and we're going to copy this URL into an assignment in Google Classroom, a document, an email, pretty much wherever we would like to put it that users are going to click. You can even add it directly in Google Classroom when you click to add a link. Now, what about working with students? How do students get their forms to each other? 2 big ways that I've seen this done. The first way is they all copy the link of their form, and the teacher has a Google Sheet. We're going to go to sheets.new, created. In that Google Sheet, the teacher has preloaded in the Google Sheet. You could also do this in a Google Docs. So we'll pull up Docs. Docs.new as well so that we can take a look. The teacher preloads student name, run, to Barb, etc. And the student names are preloaded down the side, and all the students do is they just paste their link next to their name. Once all the links are pasted next to their name, then the teacher will remove student editing access from this Google Sheet so that students can't delete the links. They're all there, and then everyone can click on the links that are within this Google Sheet. Google Sheets makes you nervous. You can do the same exact thing in a Google Doc. You're just going to insert a table and have student name and link. You're going to share this in something like Google Classroom with the ability for everyone to access, and they're going to have their names preloaded in here. Now, this is not a requirement to have their names preloaded, but I will tell you that I have learned the hard way that when I didn't have names preloaded, I always ended up, 1, missing some students, 2, students deleting each other's form links and not knowing where to write, and people writing on top of each other, and things just got messy. So having those names in there ahead of time, everyone knew exactly where to go. If I, as a teacher, want to share this back out with students later, maybe I don't want to start collecting data that day, I want to collect it another day, what I can do is make a copy of this, have all the student names on it for myself, but then delete all of the student names before I share it back with students. Doing this kind of keeps it private. So then students aren't opening up each other's forms based on who wrote the form. It kind of just gives you a whole menu of links, and they go through so many different links. You'd probably want to number the links just to make it so that students could keep track of which ones that they clicked on. Now, once we have all that together, it's time to do some data analysis. And there's a couple of different ways students within their Google form, or you as a teacher within a Google form, can analyze the data coming into that form. So we're going to click back on our forms and pretend that we have gone through everything. We've collected the data. We're going to open that form. And from here, we're going to click on the responses, and I can see how many responses I have. I only have 4 at this time, and I can see them in 3 different ways within the form. I can see a summary, which gives me by question, first name, here's all the first names, last name, here's all the foot links. I can see it by question. So here's how everyone answered for first name, here's how everyone answered for last name, here's how everyone answered for the foot and inches, or I can see it by individual. So I can see each respondent's form individually. I happen to like the summary when I'm looking at the data because I get things like my graphs and charts. But this doesn't take things very far. So how do I take it even further? And that's through the power of the Google Sheet created right from that data. So what you can do is click on this green button on your responses page, and it is going to give you the option to select a new spreadsheet or an existing one. I'm going to create a brand new spreadsheet. And I now see my data in a spreadsheet where I can see where people submitted, and I'm going to see all of my questions across the top in columns and all of my responses in rows. The thing I love about using this is I can then take this data and highlight it in some capacity. I can click my chart button. I can get some charts here. Now, something's a little wonky with my chart. I can talk about why my chart does show the data correctly or why it doesn't show the data correctly. I can think about how I might need to manipulate my data in order to correctly display it on a pie graph. So there's a lot of wonderful tools available within my preset charts that I can take a look at. So you can really dig into data and graphs and create some, quite honestly, pretty complex charts depending on what type of data you're having students collect. So, utilizing Google Sheets to leverage that ability to just deeply analyze data, talk about the labels that we put on charts, talk about how to format digital charts is huge, because if students go into any type of career in their future in which they've got to present data in some capacity, which quite honestly is a lot of fields, even ones that we don't typically tie to data, being able to effectively take a spreadsheet and convert that into data that makes sense is going to be a powerful skill for students. Plus, it really helps us dig into just talking about data in meaningful ways with students. So hopefully you've got some ideas on how you might create with Google Forms, creating surveys that you can either gather more information to learn about your students or gather data to learn about your students, and then helping students create their own data collection devices as